Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cocktails and Fishtales Online. I'm going to give the rest of our team a moment to pop on here and call in. There they are. Perfect. So normally for Cocktails and Fishtales, we have a guest speaker and it's a 21 plus presentation and we're at a brewery and it's a really good time. But tonight, the three of us, part of Harbor WildWatch's team, are coming to you live from the safety and comfort of our homes. My name is Carly Vester. I am Harbor WildWatch's communications specialist. In the name of Cocktails and Fishtales, I've brought a beverage with me this evening. I have a grapefruit gin and tonic that I'm sipping on. And as you can see, I am joined by two of our biologists with Harbor WildWatch as well. If you want to introduce yourself, ladies, let us know what you're drinking.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm the education director for Harbor WildWatch, and I am drinking some cocktail juice, some way too much grenadine with a little bit of rum and some mint.
And I'm Stina Troyer, the science specialist with Harbor WildWatch, and today I'm having a gin and tonic with cucumbers. A shout out to Heritage Distillery, as it's the Elk Rider gin tonight, and a squirt of lime. So happy to be here with you all.
And I hope that all of you at home have a beverage and are settling in with us. For those of you who might not be familiar with Harbor WildWatch, we are an environmental education nonprofit based in beautiful Gig Harbor, Washington. Our mission is to inspire stewardship for the Puget Sound and Greater Salish Sea, and we do that through fun programs like this. In particular tonight, we are thrilled to be answering all of your burning marine science questions. So a lot of folks submitted questions beforehand, but if you're tuning in now on the live stream, we also encourage you to ask questions in the comments and we'll try to keep up with them as we go. But if we don't get to them during the live stream, we will be answering them afterwards. And before I dive in, if you are inspired by Harbor WildWatch afterwards, definitely not necessary, but encouraged if you want to support us, whether that's a financial contribution or volunteering. Our website has all of that information, so I would definitely encourage you to check that out afterwards. It's harborwildwatch.org. With that, we are gonna dive into our first question. So our first question was emailed to us by RJ, and he has all the questions about red tide. What is red tide? Is it a virus? Is it an algae? Does it affect shellfish? What happens if I eat those shellfish? Can I tell if it's red tide just by looking at it? Does the water change colors? Does it happen at a certain time of year? Our red tide experts, Stina and Rachel, tell us about the red tide and answer all the questions.
Well, I mean, I don't think we're red tide experts, but we can take a stab at it, of course.
Yes, I like that you included some nice photos. I will say red tide isn't always red. I guess the poison part of it, there's some poisonous tides that don't have a red color and some algae blooms that have a red color and are not poisonous. So there's a little kind of funny, we might call it a harmful algae bloom rather than a red tide when we're talking about the stuff that is dangerous to us. So
yeah, and I'll say that really tomato soup looking algae is fairly common in the Sound. We see that happening pretty regularly in the spring and summer months. It tends to coincide with very hot, very sunny weather where we have just a huge amount of sunlight that's coming and really enriching and growing all of those photosynthetic organisms. And when the conditions are right, there's plenty of nutrients in the water and the currents are such that kind of collects them in one spot, you can really begin to see them. And from the air is really where you'll notice it. But even just walking along the shore, you can, like I've scooped some up in my hand and been able to see the color change in that water. And I have to tell you, one of the coolest moments of my life happened during one of these really big algae blooms. I was out at Squim Bay State Park in July a couple years ago, and the water at the shoreline when we were exploring the beach was just brown. It looked like stew. It was really, really gross. And people were like, should we even be in this water? And I said, I bet you that is Noctiluca. And this is a bloom of this beautiful sea sparkle. And we should come back at night. So we waited until about 10 p.m. because in July it doesn't get dark till then. And we went down to the shore, to the dock, and sure enough, any single movement in the water just lit up blue and sparkle. So we're waving our hands in the water, we're throwing rocks in, and they look like fireworks. It was really, really cool. And that's a non-harmful algae bloom. I know Stina and I have chased and looked for some of those beautiful nighttime bioluminescence, and we haven't really ever been able to find that together. But maybe this is our year, Stina.
I like it, yeah. And then kind of going back to the kind of harmful side of harmful algae blooms, I know around here there's a lot of community science groups as well as scientists who monitor the waters. This is especially important because we do a lot of harvesting of shellfish in this area, and there's things like amnesic shellfish poisoning or paralytic shellfish poisoning,
or
shellfish
diuretic.
You don't want amnesia, you don't want diarrhea, like just not a good time to eat any of that shellfish if that's around. And that's definitely something, before you go out and harvest, you can check the website, which we can probably link in the comments later. We'll look that up for you. But that's a really important thing to do as a shellfish harvester. Just make sure the stuff you're eating is safe, because there's all sorts of tiny, microscopic things that you might not see that classic red algae bloom or brown algae bloom. It could be invisible to the naked eye, and you need a microscope to look at if it's the diatoms or the dinoflagellates that are causing something to get eaten by the filter feeders that you want to eat. And if they're collecting this harmful stuff in their guts, it could give you diarrhea later or paralyze breathing.
Paralyze your lungs. That would also be pretty bad.
Not a good time.
I will say, if you're ever eating shellfish and you're feeling a little bit of tingly in your lips, stop right there. That's the first sign of paralytic shellfish poisoning. So you definitely don't want that to happen.
Yeah. Enjoy that shellfish. Okay. Eat that butter. Don't die.
So is there a reason for the red color or the not red color? Like, does it just, what's up with the color?
I think the certain concentration too. Yeah, so with these blooms, so usually in the warmer weather, or if there's a lot of nutrients in the water, that algae or whatever microscopic organism can really take off and grow and reproduce quite rapidly. And if it's in a high concentration, then you'll be able to see that color change. There's the group Eyes Over Puget Sound, and they do a lot of cool aerial photography looking at these blooms because they'll move with the currents of the water. So it's all about kind of the concentration of the amount of algae in the water based on either temperature or nutrient availability. Yeah.
Right on. All right. I think you both sufficiently answered that question. I'm going to go to question number 2. So this is from Jim, and he asked, are there any phytoplankton that can be considered an algae?
Yeah, so that word phytoplankton, if we break it down, phyto is kind of plant, plankton means drifter, so we have our plant drifters. I know Rachel has a nice way to describe how algae is not really a plant at all, but we can go into that, I think, in a future question. But these little plant drifters are photosynthesizing organisms, and they kind of range from the diatoms that can cause those harmful algae blooms to single-celled algae. There's also, I like that picture on the bottom, there's the little calcium-based creatures called coccolithophores. They're another type of phytoplankton. So there's kind of
Noctiluca is technically a coccolithophore.
Oh, perfect.
Don't quote me on that.
My favorite coccolithophore. So yeah, I would say to Jim out there that there's definitely some algae-based phytoplankton. This is going to be that microscopic stuff that is using photosynthesis to get its energy. So if it's not an algae itself, it might consume parts of algae to incorporate that into its system to get its energy. So I would say yes.
I would concur with Stina.
Perfect. All right. Question number 3 from Alessandra. Sorry. We saw a lot of oysters at the beach today and they were closed. So her daughter was wondering if they're alive when the shells are closed, if those shells can open and close if they want, and also what's up with those pearls? Why don't our oysters have pearls? I thought all oysters had pearls.
Okay, well, I can kind of speak to the pearl issue. Pearls are formed when a mollusk, typically a bivalve, though it doesn't have to, you can occasionally get snail pearls, but a bivalve with their 2 shells gets some sort of irritant. Typically it's a grain of sand that gets somehow inside their shell. And I like to think of that like sand inside your underwear. Like you're not happy about that. It's touching all of your sensitive parts. And so what the mollusk does is it tries to coat it and protect it and make it smooth. And the only material they have to do that is the interior of their shell. So it's called nacre. And depending on the species, it can be really, really shiny and beautiful, like the traditional pearls that are used in jewelry, or even like abalone, which is the beautiful shell of this weird primitive snail. But what the animal does is tries to coat it and smooth it out, and they can't really stop themselves from that process. So they just keep adding and adding and adding and adding, and really large pearls have been inside an animal for a really long time. Our oysters do form pearls occasionally, but because our oyster shells aren't very lustrous, the pearls are pretty much, they just look like a little white shell. They're not very remarkable. They also don't get terribly large. And a part of that is we just don't have super sandy beaches either. And where oysters are typically found is more rocky habitat. So yeah, not great pearls around here. But definitely if you see an oyster and you cannot separate the 2 halves, it's a live oyster. Especially if there's a bit of weight to it and it feels pretty solid inside there. That's a live oyster, and they're filter feeders. They're actually eating a lot of those planktons and algae that we just talked about that are drifting and kind of concentrating in our waters. And all they really do is open their shell just a tiny bit, and then they can pull in whatever waters around them. So this is a species that is one that you should be concerned about if you're going to eat them. You want to check the health advisories for that particular beach, and the Washington Department of Health really monitors that so that we know when is the best time of year to be eating them. And you may have heard that you really should only eat oysters in months that have an R in them, and that's because I think it's May, June, July, and August are the hottest months, where we have those big algae blooms, and they are the months that happen to not have an R in their name, which is just kind of a weird coincidence. There's nothing about the letter R that's bad for shellfish, but they are a filter feeder, and so because of that, they also don't have the ability to like select what type of food that they're eating, and so they may take in excess of those blooming, maybe causing paralytic shellfish poisoning or something like that. But they also do pull in contaminants and pollution that's in the water as well. So if somebody's dog has gone to the bathroom on that beach, they eat that. If somebody's got a leaky car and it runs into the storm drain, they're eating that too. So with filter feeders, we want to be really careful and make sure that we're harvesting from places that are really clean, with a good current flow and no bad contaminants, as best we can. Tina, did you want to add anything to that?
I'd add kind of to the when's the best time to eat oyster tip. Sometimes those summer months are when the oysters are spawning, and then most of their energy goes towards making gonads, which aren't as delicious as a not spawny oyster. So I think that's part of how that recommendation gets made too.
Nice.
Awesome. Cool.
Do you want to know what annoys an oyster?
Oh, here we go.
A noisy noise annoys an oyster.
With the jokes. Killing it with the jokes.
I love it.
They also make a great intertidal scalpel because I have one heck of a scar on my toe from getting sliced by an oyster. So they're a good shell to remind you to wear closed-toed shoes at the beach.
Well,
Yeah,
on the note of stepping on things, that was our next question from Mia, was seeing people just happily crunching away on these barnacles all the time. And we actually had a follow-up question from Katie who said, well, what about sand dollars too? There's sand dollars all over our beaches and everyone gets stepped on. What happens to them? How do you avoid them? Is it harmful to them? Are you killing them?
So this is a great question because when we lead beach walks, we begin in the high intertidal zone. And one of the first things that we talk about is the animals and what adaptations they have to surviving in that zone. It's a place that doesn't have water over it continuously. And so the animals in the highest part of the tidal zone are some of the toughest creatures out there. And barnacles totally fit that bill. If you've ever looked closely at them, they have this really volcano-y shaped shell with a little opening in the top. And if it's a live barnacle, it'll have like a set of doors, little trap doors inside there. They almost look like praying hands. And the dead barnacles will have an opening there. And so the photograph on the screen shows it pretty nicely, a live and a dead barnacle right side by side. Even the empty shells on those barnacles can persist for years after the animal has died. The calcium carbonate molecule that they use to assemble their shells is really tough. And then there's just some architectural strength to that sort of shape that they have. I don't really worry about stepping on barnacles all that much because I have grown up on the beach and I've walked on the same barnacles for decades and they're still there and they're still doing their best. That said, anytime I have the opportunity to walk around barnacles and choose like sand or rocks or gravel to stand on instead of them can be really advantageous. Even the teeniest, tiniest barnacles are pretty tough and I don't really worry about them. But in some cases, the barnacles, instead of growing wide, will grow kind of tall. They run out of space and they get sort of more like skyscrapers. And those are the more delicate barnacles just because they don't have that wide pyramid kind of shape. So I would maybe not step on really old, big barnacles. But the little guys that are kind of growing all over the place, I don't really worry about them. With sand dollars, though, that's a totally different story. And if you've ever held a sand dollar, you can really feel how fragile that they are. Their shells, called tests, are also made of calcium carbonate, but they're arranged in a much more porous structure. If you hold a sand dollar test up to the light, you can see little holes in their test. And that's where their tube feet come out. So they need to have those little holes on them. And what that means is if you step on them with the full weight of your body, it's like stepping on a potato chip. It's just not going to support your weight. But the amazing thing about sand dollars is the sand that they live in really spreads out the weight of a person. And so even if that sand is only maybe a centimeter or two thick, it's going to disperse your weight so much that it won't crush the sand dollars. If you ever find yourself in a sand dollar bed, though, because this happens, you're looking down, you're walking along, and then all of a sudden you look around you and you're surrounded by millions of sand dollars, and you're like, oh no, I have to kill some in order to get out of here. How do I ever accomplish this? The thing to do is to look for the dead ones. And a dead barnacle, you can tell from a live barnacle by their color and their texture. So the live barnacle, there's an upside down one in the photo here, has kind of spines all over it and they're dark purple or black even. That's a live barnacle. Don't step on them. They will not appreciate that. A dead barnacle will be white, although they're only white for a very short amount of time before algae grows on them. So they're usually brown and they may be partially broken. If they're flipped upside down, what you'll notice is two holes, one right in the center, that's their mouth. And then there's another hole towards the edge of their shell. I'll give you a second to guess maybe what you think that second hole is. It's connected to the mouth, but it's on the other end. And if you see that, you know it's a dead sand dollar, and you can step on the dead ones. And even if the dead ones are stuck on top of the live ones, you can step on them, and they will take the sort of force from your steps. Does that make sense? Am I describing that well enough? Stina, I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think sand dollar. You were saying barnacle a couple times, but
sand dollar. Shoot.
Yeah, and then just kind of the other side of that question was, are they a pest? We like to remind people that everything on the beach is there for a reason, and so even like there are some non-native oyster species, really everything is there, so I don't consider anything like that you want to like go crunch or step on. So you want to step gently at all times and kind of take care of those beach creatures that are out there with your best intentions. So
yes, and I will say this too, if you find yourself and you are on top of barnacles, that is not the time to be running on the beach. You will get a barnacle burn. It is the worst road rash you've ever felt in your life because of those little teeny tiny points of those volcano shapes of the barnacles just love to slice you. And I have never been scraped by barnacles that did not get infected. Every time. There's just so much space and bacteria there that you can't hope to get injured by a barnacle and not get a little irritation, a little infection from it. But luckily nothing too serious, but I'm fairly certain I probably have some scars on my ankles from barnacles as a child when I would run. So go slow. And the slower you go, the more you can look around and make sure you're not stepping on anything that's, important.
Yeah, and I think it's, if you are observing people on the beach, like we always, like to remind, like we're not the authorities and we're not going to tell you what to do or not do on the beach necessarily, but we might nicely recommend or remind people that, hey, that's a living thing, and if you're happily crunching away at barnacles, just remind them that that's hundreds of little animals that you're smashing away at, and so remembering that there's a lot of life on the beach.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. And taking the kind route of please don't do that is much better than don't do that. We've found in our experience.
So step lightly and remind gently when you're on the beach. That's a new layer to our beach etiquette, I think. We have step lightly in there on how to be a good guest to the beach.
Hey, I make the kids say a pledge, and they say that they will politely remind people who don't know how to be a good guest. So
perfect. All right, question number 5 is from one of our rock star volunteers, Don. We love Don. Shout out to Don.
Here's to Don.
Woo! He's asking how you can tell the difference between algae and seaweed.
Okay, this is one of those, it's like all sharks are fish, but not all fish are sharks kind of deals. So all seaweed is algae, but not all algae is seaweed. Does that make sense? All kelp is seaweed, all kelp is algae, but not all seaweed is kelp. There's layers to it. So for me, algae is that general term for any multicellular photosynthetic organism. So seaweed and kelp would fall into that category. Things like sea lettuce, the green swaths that you see all along the beach, the red bumpy Turkish towel, or the beautiful red bull kelp. All of them are algae. Seaweed is kind of a general term that applies to any sort of planty looking type things that grow in the ocean or in the estuary. And then kelp would be just the brown algae. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Categories of specificity.
It's like different umbrellas.
Yeah, there you go. There are more types of algae in the world than there are types of seaweed, and kelp is just one type of.
Beautiful.
I don't know that it was beautiful, but we'll go with it.
Well answered. All right, question number 6. Diane wants to know if there are toxic types of algae out there.
Yeah, lock your doors at night, Diane.
Yeah, I think as far as the algae, there's like the green blue algae, the cyanobacteria, but then I'm saying that.
But it's an algae. It's a photosynthetic. It's its own thing, and they're weird. But
yeah,
we're not taxonomists.
Yeah, I think this just kind of relates back to that paralytic shellfish poisoning. So the
those big blooms.
Concentrations of diatoms or dinoflagellates that create harmful biotoxins, which if consumed or ingested,
even things like swimmer's itch and things like that. Yeah. It can be really bad.
Yeah, and so I think if that does, a lot of times you'll see the beaches actually get closed. So usually, I know I'm subscribed to a group where I get updates about different lakes. And so if there's high levels of algae that's harmful to humans, they actually close those places so that you're not going to be out playing in the water getting sick.
That's harmful, yeah. Yeah, and that usually coincides with a big influx of nutrients. So I know in a lot of freshwater lakes, it can be from leaky septic systems, or even something as like people started feeding the geese, and all the geese are there and they're all going to the bathroom in the same spot and they're in higher concentrations than they normally are. That can cause a kind of a toxic bloom in a freshwater system. In saltwater systems, the same kind of thing can happen. So we can have leaky septic systems, or more commonly like an overflow from a sewage treatment plant, and that happens fairly frequently enough. Sometimes it may be somebody like discharging, so like a cruise ship or a Navy ship that's discharging waste into the water can cause blooms as well. So usually there's a big reason for it, a nutrient push that kind of fuels the bloom.
I'd also add like fertilizers from either your lawn care or big agriculture operations. That can definitely be a source of extra nutrients.
Very good.
Cool. Good question, Diane.
Thanks, Diane. And now we're just gonna have a round of open questions here for the next few minutes as we wrap things up. And again, if you all have questions out there, please feel free to comment. Ken had a funny comment where he said, all seaweed is algae, but some dinner is pizza. We appreciate your humor, Ken.
Hi, Ken.
So we have a couple of questions that we hear a lot from folks that throw out there. See what y'all think for answers. So one of them is, what is the biggest animal in the Puget Sound?
Oh, and I love this question because the answer is not what people think it is. So most people are thinking something like a whale. Because we do see some really big whales here. Gray whales are quite large, and humpback whales can be big. And then occasionally we'll get fin whales that wander into the sound. We've had a couple in recent years. But really, probably the longest creature in terms of like start length to end length that I personally have seen is the lion's mane jellyfish, and they get huge, so big. The tentacles have been measured at over 100 feet long, so that's blue whale length. So we're talking really, really big. The bell, so the pulsy part, the part that's not stinging on the top. If you've watched Finding Nemo, the bell on the lion's mane jelly, the biggest one I ever saw was 7.5 feet across, and that was right at Penrose Point State Park. It had washed up during a low tide and just got stranded right across the end of that big long peninsula that sticks out, and it was huge. And the tentacles, we kind of traced them and tried to follow them as long as we could. They're very stretchy and very thin, thinner than spaghetti. And we noticed a dog walking on the beach who suddenly stopped and started chewing on its paws. And it was because it had stepped on those stinging tentacles and was having a reaction to them. So that animal was nowhere. It couldn't have even seen the jellyfish. There was no way for its owners to even know, like, oh, I should be careful for my dog. Which it's crazy how big those creatures can be. I somewhere have a photograph, but this was like 15 years ago when I saw this. So it's on a hard drive of a computer that I probably don't even own anymore. So we'll see if I can dig that one up someday.
I would agree. I think Puget Sound is also pretty lucky in that we have some of the largest in the categories of animals. So we have the largest sea star species, being the sunflower star. We have the largest octopus, the giant Pacific octopus.
We get some big sharks here too.
Yeah, six-gill sharks.
Six-gill sharks are big. We've had some basking sharks that have been seen in our waters too. Great whites occasionally. We've had a couple, maybe one a decade, accidentally ends up here.
Humpback whales are big.
They're pretty big.
Fun question.
Yeah.
Don't ask me what the tiniest thing is. There's a lot of tiny things.
Well, now that you've mentioned it.
I know plankton.
It's plankton. Well,
yeah, totally.
The catch-all.
So we have a question from Tom, who is a board member and a awesome rockstar diver for us.
Cheers to Tom.
He is asking how long a moon snail lives.
I'll have to find a baby one and ask it and keep checking in on it year after year after year after year after year. That's a really interesting question because I don't know that I've ever like got a definitive answer, but I would easily say they probably live a decade. But especially when you start to see those really big ones that are like softball sized, you can count the growth rings on there because they do put down a layer in the winter time that's thinner. And so it's kind of like the growth on a tree. You can count those, but because the shell whirls and kind of laps up and over onto itself, that can be really hard to count more than like the past couple of years. But I know I've seen at least 7-year-old moon snails, and they were not nearly as big as the big ones that we see. I'm sure, Stina, do you have a definitive answer?
I just Googled it and it says 2 to 7 years.
Okay.
I like the idea that we could like, speak moon snail and be like, yo, moon snail, how old are you?
So I've wanted to do, and I would probably just need to get some permission from somebody to mark their shells and put a little nail polish on there and just see, if we could label them and do a recapture study, catch and release, and see, write 2020 on there and see how often we see them. That would be a really fun study to do.
Yeah.
Not that I'm advocating vandalism of moon snails. That's not what I said.
I think it's polite to just go, yo, moon snail.
Hey Mooney, how old are you?
Really, it's rude.
What's up over there, moon snail? Oh, okay, let's get to a couple more questions before we sign off here. This is another one that I really love, and it's, what is the most dangerous animal in the Puget Sound?
I would say the animal I'm most afraid of is a worm. And that's because it's the one that we probably encountered, that like when you flip a rock, it's really similar to the iridescent polychaetes, or pile worms or clam worms. Only it's a big polychaete, so a worm with lots of little legs, and it's kind of a pink color. And I've only heard stories, but it sounds like if you get bitten by one of those things, first it's terrifying because their jaw is a proboscis that like shoots out of its face, and it's a big enough worm that it could potentially get you. And then it basically causes skin death, so necrosis,
yeah.
Necrosis, yeah, that's the word. And you get a really nasty wound from that worm. So don't handle pink polychaetes.
I have seen the proboscis of one of those worms, and it is terrifying because you just see this like cute little worm face, and it's just sitting there, and then all of a sudden it like inverts itself, and like the terror comes out, and it's scary. I mean, it's not gonna like chase you down or anything. They don't strike or move fast, but if you've got it in your hands, it might get you. Yeah, they are freaky. What's the most dangerous? I mean, there's not a ton of things that are super dangerous to humans out there. I mean, probably eating some bad shellfish is probably your biggest threat, really. Even things like orca whales have been known. There's no known cases of them interfering with humans whatsoever in the wild. So you wouldn't really have to worry about that. I do know the red octopus, the Pacific red octopus, so not the big gigantic ones, but the little tiny guys. They do have a venomous bite, and their beak is located right in the middle of all of their arms. And so whenever we encounter one that looks to be in distress, Stina and I have this patented method of scooping them up and transporting them to the water or a safe space that does not involve touching them, because it also does have a necrosis type aspect to it, and it takes forever to heal. And I've heard it's quite painful too. So as much as cool as it would be to like handle and cuddle the octopus, yeah, definitely don't do that. It's nothing like a blue-ringed octopus like in Australia, in Indonesia, where your life is on the line if you get bitten. So they're not that venomous, but still not really something you want to mess with.
I would add to that, some fish species have spines that have a painful poke, not just because you're getting poked and that hurts, but there's some venom involved and will not feel good. So in general, it's better for fish to not handle them, and especially if you don't know if it's going to poke you and hurt a lot, it's even a better reason to leave those fish alone on the beach.
Yeah, and intertidally we see the plain-fin midshipman and other sculpin species that have this built-in sort of anti-seagull device, is how I think of it. Along the widest part of their head, they can kind of really thrust upwards. This is really, it's hard to gesture like a bullhead, but they're called staghorn sculpin for a reason, because they have this little piece of their body that sticks up, and it'll slice you like a razor blade. It really hurts. Ask me how I know. I've been cut multiple times on them, both while fishing as a kid, and then most of the time recently when I'm trying to rescue one of these fish from my kid who scoops it up, and I'm like, oh no, this kid's gonna get stabbed, and I intervene, and then of course I get stabbed. So no good deed goes unpunished. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of dangerous things here, thankfully.
We had one more question come in, and maybe this is a question we can finish things off on. It's from Andrea, who's asking about the best place around the Puget Sound to see otters. Not sea otters, but to like
to see any otters.
Otter.
Yeah, otter. I've had really good luck seeing otters in a place where you have forest right next to the beach. So we have river otters here in the Sound. They are not a fully aquatic mammal, but they feed and they forage, they swim, they play in the saltwater as well as the freshwater. So most people see them either, I mean, they're kind of just by chance. If you have an otter around and you just sit, dawn and dusk seem to be really popular times for them to come out and eat and feed and forage. And they like to be in family groups. So if you see one otter, keep your eyes peeled, because you may see more. They sometimes will, the whole litter of the little otter pups. What's baby otter called? It's gotta be a pup, right?
Yeah.
Why don't I know this? Otter pups will all go scampering together, and they will teach their families like how to eat and catch food and fish. Sunrise Beach and Narrows Beach locally are the two places where I see a lot of otter activity. Also, Maple Hollow out on the Key Peninsula is a good spot for them, and as well as anywhere where there's fresh water entering a body of salt water. So right where the estuary is, so Donkey Creek is a really great local spot, and we saw an otter just this past fall. So we were there doing a salmon tour, looking at the fish, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, here comes an otter, just making his way out to the saltwater. So that was really, really cool to see. Tina, do you have any otter commentary?
I was just thinking, when we used to have our old office with all four of us smashed into this tiny little room with a waterfront view, made it worth it.
Worth it.
We would watch the otters get into people's fishing boats.
Oh, yes.
I feel like Gig Harbor is where I've seen the most otters, but that's also a body of water that I've done a lot of looking at. So,
yeah, they're super common. If you know anybody who's got a pond too, they probably have seen otters.
And they're also really smelly. We have a place out at Lopez, and There's been many a summer where we go to have our little vacation and you just like take a deep breath and you're like, oh, the otters are under the house again, because they're
in the weasel family, right? They're just they're just big weasels. And so one comment about sea otters, since Carly, you brought them up. Sea otters are in Washington, but only on the outer coast, and only a very small population of them. So anything in our inland waters is going to be a river otter. And the river otter is about half the size of a sea otter. So they're much smaller. River otters also swim on their bellies, so they're kind of otter paddling through the water, whereas a sea otter will often be on their back and kind of do the backstroke a little bit using their back flippers. On land, they look pretty much the same except for their size. The sea otter has a way more exaggerated sort of humpback on land. They look really ridiculous moving around on land. They're much more at home in the sea. The river otters look a little bit more natural, but still also kind of ungangly. They just kind of, they're funny looking little creatures.
Otters. Yeah, otter love them.
I do love them.
Okay, we got one more question, and we're going to end on this question because I kind of love this question. And it makes me, I don't know, it makes me happy that Grace asked it. What is, I mean, we can roundtable this. What is the strangest animal you've seen in the Puget Sound?
I knew I was going to get asked this question, and I don't really want to be truthful with my answer because it's quite inappropriate.
You have to know.
Second strangest?
Second strangest. I mean, I can tell you about one of the most rare creatures I've ever seen. How about that?
I want both.
Okay.
But rarest, sure.
We'll start with the rarest because I got to work up to the other one. I got to tell the children to leave the room. So, okay, so the rarest, weirdest, coolest thing that I probably got most oh shoot, I thought of another one. Okay, the second rarest thing that I've ever seen. I was down at Jersey Dock and I was looking into the water, and all of a sudden this purple blob starts rainbowing at me. That's the word. The cilia on the outside of a big predatory ctenophore, which is like kind of like a jelly, but instead of like a medusa and stingy tentacles, it's like a hot dog bun with a mouth on one end and an opening on the other. And they just swim around like engulfing things. And it was this big, which for a ctenophore is huge. And it was lavender purple. And then the cilia on the edges that they use to move, they look like they remind me of like a CD. So when you shine a CD in the light, you get kind of all that rainbowy color. And so it was like rainbowing at me. And I got really excited and had to explain to a bunch of people what a ctenophore was. And then they didn't really care. They didn't realize how cool of a find it was. So that was really, really great. And I'm going to hand it off to Sina, and then I'll get a picture of my weirdest thing I've ever seen. Queued up on my screen.
I think the thing that first came to mind for me was something we smelled before we saw it, because it was definitely dead. And it was on a night beach monitoring adventure out at Narrows Park. So I think it's probably 1 a.m. and we're doing some science out on the beach, still like getting this whiff of death every once in a while. And so when we got around to doing our sea star survey, which looks for sea stars which have signs of wasting or health, either way, we'll take them both, we kind of started following the smell and ended up finding a huge carcass of a 6-gill shark, which is absolutely something I would love to see while scuba diving someday, alive and well. But the dead carcass was like also very cool. I've seen a lot of cool dead stuff, but yeah.
A lot of cool dead stuff. I missed the opportunity to see a big dead 6-gill shark. I'm really sad about it. To this day, I was down in Portland, and Bruce Holster, he was then the president of Harbor WildWatch, called me, and he had a 6-gill shark that washed up on his beach. And I said, Bruce, can you do me a favor? And he goes, yeah, sure, anything. What do you need? And I was like, can you cut the head off for me? And he said, No, I absolutely will not do that. I said, please, Bruce, I really want the jaws of a 6-gill shark because they're really cool. They're super prehistoric. And it's really the only part of a shark that you can preserve in any way because they're so stinky and so they rot, they liquefy very quickly. And so I begged him and he said, okay, what kind of tool do I need? And I was like, a hacksaw? I've never cut a shark's head off before, but do your best. And then he calls me back a little bit later and said he wasn't able to get me the head, but he pulled out 3 teeth for me. So I have them in a jar on my desk. So there you have it. Carly, what's the weirdest thing you ever found?
When I was walking on my parents' beach, I think this was last spring, I came across just a blob essentially on the beach. And I had a moment of like, is this a jellyfish? Is this like, what is this? And I think I texted Rachel. Usually when I come across weird things that I can't ID, or even things that I'm like, this is normal, but I'm not entirely sure what this is, I shoot a text to Rachel or Stina. They're my go-to people. And so I think
can I just say, all of you Facebook people out there, you can text us too. Send a message to Harbor WildWatch Facebook page. That comes to us. We will answer you.
Either our Facebook page or info@harborwildwatch.com. Those are my favorite emails by far. When I open up my inbox and I have an ID question, we just had one about this giant, I think 2-foot worm that I was like, that's so cool. I don't know the answer. Let me loop in Stina and Rachel. They know it. So yeah, if you ever see anything, ask us.
See something weird, ask us.
Yeah, so I found this blobby thing and I texted Rachel and I had the thought in my head, like, let me get it back in the water. Let me see what happens when I get it in the water. So I put it back in the water and lo and behold, it completely unfurled its body and it was a giant nudibranch. And it just did this happy little, I'm in the water, I feel good, I'm not dried out anymore. It was so happy and it made me so happy. And it just like, I knew what they were, but I had never seen one in person. So maybe not weirdest as much as coolest, but it also was a really good lesson of like, when you come across something on the beach, maybe don't touch it. Like I scooped sand under it, I was careful. Be gentle, but do a little bit of investigating, like be curious about it and see if you can ID it or text us, call us.
All right, are you guys ready to see the weirdest thing I've ever seen on the beach?
Let's do it.
It's an animal. So all right, I gotta share my screen here. Hold on, Carly, can you turn off your screen share so I can steal it?
This is our big ending note. What is Rachel gonna show us?
We're really going out. We're really going out with the inappropriate anemone. I was on a school field trip when I found this anemone, and we did not go near it because I didn't want to. I lost it. I was laughing so hard. I snapped this quick photo, and then we hightailed it out of there because you see what this looks like. This is actually a plumose anemone. They at low tide look like hanging balls of snot. So this is a little bit different. But the 2 brown ones over here are also Metridium anemones. They come in kind of brown, orange, a reddish, and this kind of whitish gray. So there you have it. That is the weirdest thing I have ever seen on the beach.
I don't know what to say.
What can you say? I took a picture of it.
Well, now that we've hit that point of the show, folks, we are gonna leave you for the evening. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, joining us, sending in your questions and asking them as we go. As always, we appreciate your support. And if you want to learn more about these fun, sometimes strange digital programs that we do, feel free to sign up for our email list on our website. We send out a weekly email with the whole scope of our lessons and workshops and all the fun things. Otherwise, have a great evening. Stay healthy and safe out there. And hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Cheers.
Clink.
Learn how to
Glasses all around. All right. Bye, everyone.